The most honest history of ancient Rome was written in its sewers. We are about to descend into the underworld of archaeology, where the true story of a civilization is not found in its palaces, but in its plumbing. By the end of this journey, you will see all of human history through the revolutionary lens of what we left behind. What secrets are hidden in the lost drains of the Indus Valley? And what did a society truly value based on what it threw away? How much of our own lives might be preserved in the pipes beneath our cities? That image of an archaeologist sifting through ancient waste is not just a thought experiment. It is the daily reality of a growing number of researchers. They stand at the confluence of two rivers, one of water and one of time, where the most mundane acts of millions of people have been preserved for millennia. These underground channels functioned as the metabolic heart of a city, processing the evidence of every meal eaten, every illness suffered, and every craft practiced. When Dr. Vance calls toilets truth-tellers, she points to a fundamental honesty in this material. A king's chronicle can boast of endless feasts, but the seeds and bones in the sewer tell us if the common people were starving. An imperial edict might proclaim religious unity, but the discarded household shrines in a drain reveal the gods people actually prayed to in private. This is the ultimate bottom-up history, written not by the victors, but by the contents of their kitchen sinks and chamber pots. The engineering itself is a silent testament to social values. A wide, well-maintained public sewer suggests investment in communal health, a priority for the whole body of the city. A narrow, crumbling drain, however, speaks to neglect, inequality, and a society fractured between those who lived above the filth and those who were forced to wade through it. So when we ask what a city's gutters say about its soul, we are asking about its daily rhythms, its public health, its hidden divisions, and the unvarnished truth of how its people actually lived. In a cramped Roman insula, a shared latrine tells a story its users never could. Archaeologists sifting through the hardened sediment found more than just human waste. They uncovered traces of pepper from India and the distinct residue of fermented fish sauce called garum, shipped all the way from Spain. This humble drain held the ghost of a global economy. The principle is as simple as it is profound. What a civilization throws away is its truest cultural signature. This isn't about grand monuments or imperial decrees. It's about the seeds and bones that reveal the common person's meal and the exotic spices that speak to the elite's palate. The very composition of this refuse is a direct reflection of trade networks, social structure, and daily life. By analyzing the fragments, we can distinguish between the coarse bread eaten by the masses and the expensive imported figs enjoyed by the wealthy. The types of pottery and glass discarded in one neighborhood compared to another paint a clear picture of economic status and consumer habits across the city's districts. Even the parasites tell a social story. Certain intestinal worms were far more common among populations that consumed undercooked meat or freshwater fish, luxuries often reserved for the upper classes, while other parasites plagued those living in more crowded, less sanitary conditions. This cultural signature is uniquely honest. It is unedited by scribes and untouched by propaganda. A poet might write of Rome's simple, virtuous past, but the garbage tells a different tale, one of complex global tastes and stark social divides. By learning to read this raw, unassuming data, we move beyond what people said they did in their literature and their art to what they actually did day after day, meal after meal. It is the ultimate check against the idealized versions of history, giving us a genuine, unfiltered snapshot of life as it was truly lived. The sheer scale of the Cloaca Maxima was a statement in stone. This was not a hidden conduit but a monumental feat of engineering, a vaulted tunnel so immense that its construction was credited to kings. Its grandeur tells us something profound about Roman society, that the management of waste was a matter of public pride and imperial power. This principle reveals that the engineering of a sewer system is far more than practical plumbing. It is a clear mirror of a society's social order and its deepest values. A centralized, well-maintained public sewer, like Rome's, signals a powerful government with the organizational capacity to coordinate massive labor and the political will to invest in the health of the entire civic body. It speaks to a belief in a shared communal life, a recognition that the well-being of the city depended on the well-being of all its people, at least in principle. The materials chosen for these projects are themselves a ledger of resources and knowledge. The shift from rough stone to precisely laid brick or durable terracotta pipes maps a civilization's growing technological sophistication and economic wealth. But the flow of the system itself often traced the city's social geography. Wastewater typically traveled from the elevated villas of the wealthy downhill through the system, often passing directly beneath or alongside the crowded insulae of the poor. This wasn't just gravity at work, it was a physical manifestation of social hierarchy, an engineered landscape where privilege literally lived upstream. A haphazard or absent public system, by contrast, suggests a different set of priorities. It might point to a weaker central authority unable to mandate such projects, or a culture that prioritized private solutions like individual cesspits over communal investment. In such places, the burden of sanitation fell unevenly, often creating stark divides in health and living conditions between neighborhoods. The choices a society makes about its gutters and drains reveal its relationship with cleanliness, with disease, and with the very environment it builds. This infrastructure is never neutral. It is the physical embodiment of political ideals and social contracts, written not on parchment, but in brick and water flow. A microscopic world, hidden for centuries, holds the story of ancient suffering. Deep within the hardened layers of a Roman cesspit, a scientist discovers a tiny, resilient capsule, the egg of an intestinal whipworm. This is the frontier of Paleoparasitology, a field that reads the biological fine print of history to reconstruct the health of entire populations from the parasites they left behind. These eggs are incredibly durable, their shells designed by evolution to survive harsh conditions, which makes them perfect time capsules in the anaerobic environment of a sewer. The specific types of parasites present act as a direct diagnostic tool. A high concentration of roundworm and whipworm eggs, for instance, points directly to a phenomenon called fecal contamination, where human waste is not properly separated from food and water. This is a clear, measurable sign of poor sanitation, but the story goes deeper than just cleanliness. The presence of a fish tapeworm, which requires an intermediate host in freshwater, tells us that someone in that household was eating raw or undercooked fish, a potential luxury. The liver fluke found in sheep and cattle speaks to a society deeply engaged with animal husbandry. This biological data can even trace the movement of people. Finding a parasite species native to Northern Europe in the sewers of a Mediterranean port city provides physical evidence of travel, trade, or military deployment, a silent witness to an individual's long-forgotten journey. By quantifying these parasites, researchers can move beyond vague descriptions of sickness to understand the true burden of disease. They can calculate what percentage of a population was likely afflicted by chronic diarrhea, malnutrition, and abdominal pain, conditions that would have shaped the rhythm of every single day. This record challenges the official histories written by the healthy and the wealthy. While an elite Roman might write about the robust health of the empire, the parasite eggs from a common neighborhood tell a different, more visceral story, one of widespread daily discomfort that rarely made it into the chronicles. This is the intimate, physical reality of the past, written not in ink, but in the enduring shells of creatures that lived within the human body. A Mesopotamian drain, caked with millennia of silt, holds more than just the ghost of forgotten meals. When scientists wash the soil through fine sieves, they find a glittering residue, tiny particles of copper and tin. This is the fourth principle of sewer archaeology, that these channels are archives of a city's economic engine. Every workshop, every market stall left its own unique chemical signature in the water that flowed away. The drain becomes a map of urban industry. A concentration of metal filings points directly to a bronzesmith's forge operating nearby. Traces of vibrant chemical dyes reveal the location of a textile workshop. The specific mineral composition of pottery glazes can tell us not only where the potters worked, but sometimes even the source of their clay. This is how we trace the economic geography of a city, not from tax records, but from the physical evidence of its labor, washed into the gutters and preserved. The proof of long-distance trade is just as tangible. Finding a single peppercorn in a Roman latrine in Britain is not just a curiosity, it is a data point. It is a physical piece of a trade route that stretched thousands of miles, evidence of a demand for luxury that connected the edges of the empire to its heart. Similarly, a microscopic silk fiber, preserved in the right conditions, speaks of connections that reached all the way to China. These are not items mentioned in a merchant's ledger. They are the items themselves, lost and discarded, offering irrefutable proof of what was actually being used and consumed. The very volume and character of this waste acts as an economic barometer. In layers of sediment dating to a time of peace and prosperity, archaeologists find a greater density of luxury goods, more fine pottery, more exotic food remains, and a wider variety of imported materials. In layers from a period of war or famine, the waste stream often becomes thinner, more monotonous, dominated by local, utilitarian goods and evidence of scarcity. Even a single coin dropped and lost in the muck is a treasure trove of information. Its mint marks and where patterns can help date the entire layer of the sewer, while its very presence, alongside broken commercial weights and measures, helps us understand the daily mechanics of buying and selling. By reading this sunken ledger, we are not just guessing at ancient economics, we are holding its physical residue, reconstructing the bustling marketplace of the ancient world from what it casually let flow down the drain. A Roman sewer's deepest layers hold time itself, pressed into distinct bands of earth and debris. This stratified sediment forms the fifth principle of sewer archaeology, a natural chronology built from the steady accumulation of daily life. Each layer is a page in a history book written by the city itself, a sequence that can be read from the oldest deposits at the bottom to the most recent near the top. To date these pages, scientists use tools like radiocarbon dating on preserved seeds or bones and ceramic typology, which tracks the evolution of pottery styles. A sudden, thick layer of charcoal and shattered roof tiles might mark the year a great fire swept through the district. Another stratum filled with arrowheads and hastily discarded valuables could correspond to a known invasion, capturing a single day of panic preserved in the mud. But the real power of this timeline is in its quiet, cumulative story. By analyzing layer after layer, we can watch as imported African pottery gradually replaces local wares, signaling a shift in trade networks or cultural tastes over generations. A slow decline in the variety of fish bones might point to the overfishing of a local estuary. an environmental change that would never appear in any official record. This gives us a continuous narrative of the commonplace, a flowing chronicle of how a city's diet, economy, and daily habits transformed across decades or even centuries. Where a historian might have only the dates of kings and battles, the sewer provides a dated record of what people were eating for dinner during those reigns and conflicts. It allows us to see history not as a series of dramatic interruptions, but as a deep, steady current of lived experience. This sunken clock measures time not in grand events, but in the endless, rhythmic pulse of what was used, consumed, and thrown away. The cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were engineered marvels of their time. Over 4,000 years ago, their streets were laid out in a precise grid, and beneath them ran a network of covered drains so advanced it would not be out of place in a modern town. This was not a system for the elite alone. Nearly every single house, from the smallest dwelling to the larger structures, contained a bathroom that fed directly into these street-side channels. The entire city was connected to a single, unifying idea that public hygiene was a collective responsibility. This infrastructure was a masterpiece of practical design. The drains were built with a careful gradient, ensuring that water would flow efficiently and carry waste away from the homes. They were covered with brick slabs to contain odors and debris, and they featured something almost unbelievable for the era: regular manholes. These access points allowed for maintenance, meaning someone or some group was actively managing this subterranean network. The sheer scale and uniformity of this system points to a powerful, centralized authority. But unlike the pharaohs who built pyramids or the kings who erected vast palaces, the rulers of the Indus Valley seem to have invested their power and resources into the mundane miracle of public works. The most impressive structures they left behind are not temples but toilets, not monuments to gods, but a guarantee of cleanliness for all. The waste collected from these ancient sewers tells a story that matches the architecture. Analysis of the residues reveals a stable, agricultural society that relied on staples like wheat and barley, and raised domesticated animals like cattle and sheep. Remarkably, the dietary evidence shows little variation from one neighborhood to another. There are no exclusive luxuries for a privileged few, and no signs of desperate scarcity for the masses. This suggests a society with a surprising degree of equity, at least in terms of basic nutrition. The Indus Valley civilization presents a profound contrast to others we have explored. Here was a culture that seemingly prioritized collective well-being over ostentatious displays of individual power. Their greatest achievement, as read through their sewers, was not conquest but civility, a quiet, organized, and pragmatic society whose legacy is written in brick and flowing water. The stone arch of the Cloaca Maxima yawns like a great mouth, pouring its dark water into the Tiber. To stand before it was to witness the raw ambition of Rome itself. This was no hidden conduit, but a monument to engineering, so vast that legends claimed it was built by kings. Its original purpose was brutally practical: to drain the swampy valley that would become the Roman Forum, transforming a marsh into the very heart of an empire. Yet this public health project evolved into something far grander: a subterranean river system so large that the emperor himself was said to have toured its depths by boat. This was infrastructure as a declaration of power, a statement that Rome could not only conquer nature, but also process its own waste on an epic scale for centuries. The system became so fundamental to the city's identity that it was, in a way, deified, personified as a goddess to be revered and maintained by the state. What stories did this stone goddess collect? The sediments preserved in the latrines that fed into it tell a global tale. Traces of fish sauce from Spain, fig seeds from the eastern Mediterranean, and date pits from North Africa all mingle in the muck. Each seed is a tiny piece of a vast economic machine, proof that the Roman dinner table, at least for some, stretched across the known world. This was the empire's metabolism, with the great sewer as its digestive tract. Its engineering marvels extended beyond waste, masterfully managing the colossal runoff from public baths and countless fountains, a testament to an unparalleled mastery of water itself. Yet for all its grandeur, the Cloaca Maxima also exposes a deep social fracture. This marvel of public works primarily served the grand public spaces, the imperial palaces, and the villas of the wealthy. High above the flowing sewers, in the cramped, towering apartment blocks known as insulae, the common people had no such luxury. Their reality was the chamber pot, emptied from upper-story windows into the narrow, reeking alleys below. The grand sewer was a symbol of imperial power, yes, but one that flowed conspicuously around the lives of the majority. It stands as a permanent testament to Roman ambition, a duality of brilliant engineering and profound inequality, forever carved into the stone beneath the city. 1,000 years after Rome, the streets of a medieval town told a different story. Here, the grand vision of public sanitation had vanished, replaced by a daily, private struggle against filth. The Roman ideal of a collective civic body protected by shared infrastructure had shattered into 1,000 individual problems. People managed their own waste, typically by tossing the contents of chamber pots from upper windows directly into the open street. Cesspits were dug near homes, but they frequently leaked, slowly poisoning the very wells from which people drew their drinking water. This was a world where the river of time had reversed its flow, not toward communal health, but toward private survival. The archaeological evidence from this era is stark and unambiguous. When scientists analyze the soil from medieval latrine pits, they find a microscopic horror story. The levels of roundworm and whipworm eggs are often exponentially higher than anything found in Roman contexts. These parasites, which spread through contact with human feces, are a direct biological indictment of the sanitation crisis. They point to a population living in constant, intimate contact with its own waste, suffering from chronic diarrhea, malnutrition, and abdominal pain. This was not a temporary hardship, but a baseline condition of urban life for centuries. What does this tell us about the society that allowed it? The chaotic, neglected streets were a perfect reflection of the fragmented political landscape. There was no strong central authority with the power or the will to coordinate a massive public works project like the Cloaca Maxima. Power was localized, economies were smaller, and the very concept of investing in the health of the entire community had faded from memory. This was a regression etched into the urban environment itself. Life expectancies plummeted, and when the Black Death arrived in the 14th century, it found cities that were perfect breeding grounds for disease. The crowded, unsanitary conditions allowed the plague to burn through populations with terrifying speed. The medieval era stands as a powerful, sobering reminder that progress in sanitation is not a one-way street. The knowledge of how to build a healthy city can be forgotten. The commitment to a shared, clean environment can dissolve, leaving communities to wrestle with problems they no longer have the tools to solve. This was not a period of simple ignorance, but one of profound loss, a centuries-long experiment in what happens when a civilization turns its back on the lessons written in its own sewers. The true cost of Rome's grandeur was paid in the darkness below. While senators debated in sunlit forums and merchants crowded the streets above, an invisible army of laborers crawled through the toxic, cramped passages of the Cloaca Maxima. These were the forgotten men, the slaves, convicts, and impoverished citizens upon whose shoulders the entire city's health literally rested. in Rome, maintenance of the sewers was a dreaded public duty, a chore known as the cura cloacarum. This was not a job for skilled engineers, but a form of punishment, often assigned to criminals or the very lowest class of citizen. They were the ones who descended with bronze picks and shovels, their bodies bent in the perpetual gloom, their lungs filled with air thick with decay. The dangers they faced were constant and horrifying. A sudden downpour in the city above could turn their quiet tunnel into a raging torrent in minutes, drowning them before they could escape. Invisible pockets of methane gas could ignite, while hydrogen sulfide, the gas that gives rotting waste its characteristic smell, could paralyze the nervous system with a single deep breath. The walls, under constant pressure, could collapse without warning, burying them alive in the filth of the empire. This reliance on coerced, disposable labor reveals a brutal social contract. The same society that celebrated public health through its grand engineering was utterly dependent on the suffering of its most marginalized people to sustain it. But was this the only way? In other cultures, like the meticulous Indus Valley, the maintenance of those sophisticated drains may have fallen to a specialized, if still low-status profession. Someone had to understand the careful gradients, to clear the brick-lined channels, and to ensure the manholes remained accessible. These workers, whether slaves or specialists, never appear in the victory columns or the epic poems. Their names are lost, yet by holding a replica of their simple bronze shovel, or by tracing the tool marks they left in the sewer brickwork, we can finally acknowledge their existence. Their story forces a difficult question, one that echoes up through the centuries. How many of our own modern marvels, the clean water and the bright lights of our cities, are built upon layers of invisible, forgotten toil? To truly understand an ancient civilization, we must look not only at the monuments it built, but at the human price paid by those who built them and who kept them running one terrifying day at a time. Inside the lab, the real magic begins with water and patience. An archaeologist gently washes a lump of hardened sewer sludge into a flotation tank, a simple device that uses moving water to separate the dense from the light. What rises to the surface is a ghostly collection of the past, a delicate scum of centuries-old seeds, tiny fish bones, and fragments of eggshell. What sinks is sorted to reveal fruit stones, animal bones, and charred bits of food. This meticulous process is how we reconstruct a lost menu, one that tells a far more honest story than any surviving cookbook. We are not reading about what a wealthy author thought people should eat. We are holding the physical evidence of what they actually consumed, meal after meal. The variety of grains tells us about agricultural practices, whether a society relied on a single staple like wheat or a diverse mix of barley and millet. The fish bones are like tiny receipts from the ancient marketplace. In Viking Age York, the sewers were filled with the remains of cod and herring, revealing a community whose prosperity was deeply tied to the sea. Meanwhile, in the sun-baked drains of Pompeii, archaeologists found the seeds of imported figs, pits from local olives, and even the spiny shells of sea urchins, painting a vivid picture of a Mediterranean diet frozen in time. Butchery marks on animal bones are another language altogether. The specific cuts and the age at which an animal was slaughtered speak volumes about economic choices. A high proportion of old dairy cows, for instance, suggests a society that valued milk production over tender meat, while the presence of young, prime livestock points to wealth and occasional feasting. Even the burnt fragments have a story to tell. A layer of charred grain might point to a common kitchen accident, a porridge left too long over the fire, or it could be evidence of a larger tragedy, like a city-wide fire that carbonized entire storerooms. This is the ultimate democratization of history. The grand feasts described in epic poems were for the elite, but the contents of a sewer belong to everyone. This evidence provides a daily menu for the masses, a direct and unflinching line to the dinner tables of the common man, woman, and child, telling us what sustained them, what they enjoyed, and what they lost in a single catastrophic moment. A child's leather shoe, perfectly preserved in the anaerobic mud of a Roman drain, is more revealing than any statue. This tiny, discarded object, lost centuries ago, is a fragment of a life interrupted. Sewers are filled with such accidental time capsules, a treasure trove not of gold but of the commonplace. These are the artifacts of the forgotten, items dropped and never recovered, or thrown away because they were broken beyond repair. They form an unbiased sample of material culture, a democratic collection curated not by kings, but by chance. Unlike the pristine objects displayed in museums, which were often chosen for their beauty or ceremonial importance, this sewer assemblage represents the real, worn texture of daily existence. A collection of common pottery shards reveals more than just eating habits. Over time, the styles and fabrics of these broken dishes change. A shift from locally produced courseware to imported, fine red gloss pottery signals a change in trade or a new cultural influence sweeping through a neighborhood. These fragments are a timeline of taste and economics written in clay. Lost personal items are perhaps the most poignant. A single bone hairpin, slipped from a woman's hair as she leaned over a drain, speaks to fashion and personal care. A broken bronze ring, its gemstone long since lost, hints at a moment of carelessness or loss. These are not the jewels of queens, but the adornments of ordinary people, telling us what they considered beautiful. Even more intimate are the traces of childhood, a set of worn astragali or knucklebones used in a simple game, or a crudely carved wooden animal figure, offer a rare and precious glimpse into the world of ancient children. We hear their laughter in these lost toys. The condition of every object has its own story to tell. A cooking pot, carefully repaired with a lead clamp, was valued enough to be mended, not discarded. A coin worn so smooth it is almost featureless passed through countless hands in the marketplace. A leather sandal, its sole thin and holed from miles of walking, maps a life of hard work and constant motion. This accidental curation corrects the historical record, which so often prioritizes the magnificent. It forces us to value the mundane, the broken, and the lost. In that small, waterlogged shoe, we do not see an emperor or a philosopher. We see a child, and for a fleeting moment, the centuries between us simply vanish. Yet for all its honesty, the sewer's story is not the whole story. This remarkable archive comes with its own set of biases and limitations, a filter through which we must carefully interpret the past. The first and most significant gap is geographic. Sewer systems were almost exclusively an urban phenomenon. The vast majority of people in the ancient world lived in the countryside, on farms and in small villages, and their lives left a very different, more scattered archaeological footprint. The vibrant, global diet of a Roman city dweller, preserved in the Cloaca Maxima, tells us nothing about the daily meal of a farmer living just a few miles outside the walls, whose waste went into a simple pit. The urban record is loud and concentrated, while the rural past whispers, and we must strain to hear it. Even within a city, the plumbing was not democratic. Wealthier districts, with their sophisticated plumbing and direct connections to the main conduits, are often overrepresented in the archaeological record. Their waste was systematically channeled into the very places most likely to preserve it for millennia. Meanwhile, the poorest neighborhoods, relying on chamber pots emptied into open gutters or cesspits that leached into the soil, are far more archaeologically silent. The sewer can inadvertently amplify the voice of the elite while muffling the whispers of the slums. The materials themselves have a say in what survives. Organic matter decomposes at different rates. A tough olive pit or a fish vertebra can last for thousands of years, while a leaf of lettuce or a piece of boiled meat vanishes without a trace. This means our view of the ancient diet is skewed toward the durable, potentially missing entire categories of soft fruits, vegetables, and delicate foods that were just as important. The timeline itself can be scrambled. A sudden, catastrophic flood can rip through a sewer, scouring out years of accumulated layers and redepositing them in a chaotic jumble, mixing the artifacts of different generations into a single, misleading stratum. And for all its intimate details, the sewer record is utterly silent on the inner life of a civilization. We can find the discarded household shrine, but we cannot hear the prayer that was whispered before it. We can uncover a child's toy, but we cannot know the joy or sorrow it witnessed. The complex tapestry of language, belief, love, and fear leaves no chemical signature or physical residue in the drain. This is why the sewer archaeologist must always work in concert with other disciplines. The seeds and bones from the drain must be read alongside the poetry of the era. The garbage must be compared to the legal codes, and the parasite eggs must be contextualized by the surviving medical texts. Only by admitting what the sewers cannot tell us can we truly appreciate the profound, unvarnished truth of what they can. The soil sample looks like nothing more than a lump of dark clay, but to the modern archaeologist, it is a library waiting to be read. Today's toolkit for exploring these ancient drains has transformed, moving far beyond the trowel and brush to a suite of instruments that feel more at home in a laboratory than a dig site. One of the most powerful of these is soil micromorphology, a technique where scientists impregnate a block of sediment with resin and slice it into sections thinner than a human hair. Placed under a powerful microscope, this thin section reveals a hidden universe, a snapshot of the past frozen in time. The scientist can see individual seeds, the microscopic shells of parasite eggs, and even the specific types of plant fibers and construction dust that settled into the muck, telling a story of daily life in astonishing detail. Another revolutionary tool is the analysis of ancient DNA. From a single, degraded sample of sediment, researchers can now extract genetic traces of the life that passed through the sewer. They can identify the specific breed of wheat ground into flour for bread, the type of fish served for dinner, and even the gut bacteria that lived inside the people themselves. This molecular evidence provides a biological profile of an entire population, revealing their health, their diet, and their domesticated animals at a genetic level. Chemical analysis adds another layer to this story. A technique called gas chromatography mass spectrometry, or GCMS, is used to identify lipid residues. These are the durable molecular fingerprints of fats, oils, and waxes. In a cooking pot shard found in a drain, these lipids can tell us whether a family cooked with olive oil or animal fat, and whether they used beeswax for lighting their home. A single chemical signature can distinguish a lamp that burned fish oil from one that burned vegetable oil, painting a more intimate picture of household economies. Perhaps the most futuristic tools are those that allow us to see without digging. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses of energy into the earth, mapping buried walls and hollow channels by reading the reflected signals. Light detection and ranging, or LiDAR, uses lasers from an aircraft to create a detailed three-dimensional map of the ground surface, often revealing the subtle imprint of completely buried structures. These technologies let archaeologists map entire subterranean networks, planning their excavations with surgical precision and preserving the fragile sites from unnecessary damage. This scientific revolution is what elevates sewer archaeology from a messy curiosity to a cutting-edge historical discipline. It transforms anonymous dirt into rich, complex datasets, revealing stories written in molecules and microscopic structures, stories that were utterly impossible to read just a generation ago. The refuse of the past has become one of our most eloquent sources, speaking to us through the language of science. A single leather shoe lost by a child forces a difficult question. How much of our own private lives, centuries from now, will be sifted through by curious strangers? The very act of sewer archaeology is built upon a profound ethical tension, a balance between our insatiable curiosity and the fundamental privacy of people who never consented to this level of scrutiny. We are reading a diary they never meant to write, composed of their most discarded and intimate moments. This is not a simple matter of studying old bones and broken pots. It is the analysis of personal health, of dietary habits, and of household rituals that were always meant to remain private. The ethical challenge becomes even more delicate when dealing with the recent past or with the ancestral remains of living cultural groups. For some communities, disturbing these layers is not a scientific endeavor, but a violation of sacred ground. The pursuit of knowledge must therefore be guided by a deep and abiding respect, a commitment to consult with descendant communities, and a recognition that some stories, while knowable, may not be ours to tell. The physical dangers of this work are equally sobering. A modern archaeologist does not descend into a Roman sewer with a simple torch and a shovel. They wear full respirators and protective suits, guarding against invisible threats that have waited for centuries. The anaerobic environment that preserves organic materials so perfectly can also preserve ancient bacteria and viruses. While the risk of a long-dormant plague reawakening is extremely low, the threat from toxic gases like hydrogen sulfide is immediate and lethal. A single misplaced step can mean a collapse or a sudden flood from a modern rainstorm. Every excavation is a carefully choreographed dance with these hidden perils, governed by safety protocols that treat the site as both a treasure chest and a biohazard. And then there is the final, practical question: what do we do with all this waste once we are done with it? After the seeds have been counted, the parasite eggs catalogued, and the DNA sequenced, we are left with tons of ancient refuse. We cannot simply rebury it without careful documentation, and we cannot store it all forever in climate-controlled facilities. This forces a conversation about what we value enough to keep, and what we must respectfully let return to the earth. These ethical and practical considerations are not side notes to the science, they are central to its practice. They remind us that we are not just studying objects, we are handling the physical echoes of human lives. This work demands a new kind of respect, one that looks into the intimate debris of the past and sees not just data, but people, compelling us to proceed with both wonder and profound humility. The Roman obsession with waste removal was not the only path forward. Across the globe, ancient China developed a radically different philosophy of water management. In the magnificent capital of Chang'an, engineers designed an extensive network of canals that served a triple purpose. These waterways moved goods and people, irrigated nearby fields, and also carried away the city's refuse. This was not a system dedicated solely to sanitation, but an integrated approach where waste was just one element in a complex, flowing urban metabolism. The goal was not simply to banish filth, but to harness water's power for multiple, simultaneous functions, a reflection of a holistic view of the natural world. This stands in stark contrast to the Indus Valley's model, which prioritized a decentralized, household-level solution. There, the focus was on ensuring every single home had a direct, private connection to a public good, building civic health from the ground up, one bathroom at a time. Further east, the Maya of Mesoamerica present another fascinating variation. They were masters of hydrology, constructing intricate reservoirs, aqueducts, and canals to manage water in a challenging environment. They built elaborate stone toilets and steam baths, demonstrating a clear concern for personal and ritual cleanliness. Yet evidence for dedicated, centralized sewerage for waste is less clear. Their brilliance was channeled toward the sacred and practical control of freshwater, for drinking, agriculture, and ceremony, suggesting a different hierarchy of needs where managing rainfall was more critical than managing sewage. These divergent blueprints were never just about engineering. They were manifestations of deep-seated cultural beliefs, a society that viewed waste primarily as a dangerous pollutant, like Rome, would design systems to expel it as far from the city as possible. Another culture, perhaps seeing it as a potential resource, would design systems that funneled it toward agricultural fields for reuse. The very definition of cleanliness was at stake. Was it the absence of visible waste, or was it a state of balance and harmonious flow within the urban environment? This comparative view dismantles any simple notion of progress. It reveals a tapestry of human ingenuity, where each civilization devised a solution shaped by its environment, its beliefs, and its understanding of the human body. There is no single superior model, only a series of brilliant, context-specific answers to the universal challenge of how to live together without being poisoned by our own existence. The health of a city's gutters shaped its very destiny. An effective sewer system was not a mere convenience, it was the invisible architecture that permitted a metropolis to exist at all. Without a way to safely remove human waste, population density became a death sentence. Waterborne diseases like cholera and typhoid would sweep through crowded neighborhoods with terrifying speed, periodically culling the urban population and preventing sustained growth. A city that mastered its waste, however, could pack people into its streets and insulate without constantly triggering a demographic collapse. This dense population was the fuel for civilization, enabling the specialized labor, complex bureaucracies, and large standing armies that defined an empire. Rome could not have fielded its legions or built its monuments without the million people living within its walls, and that million depended on the water flowing through the Cloaca Maxima. This relationship between cleanliness and concentration created a powerful feedback loop. The very need for a constant, clean water supply to flush these sewers spurred some of history's most ambitious engineering projects, the Great Aqueducts. These soaring arches did more than just supply drinking water and public baths. They were the life support system for the city's sanitation. The aqueducts of Rome, Carthage, and Constantinople were not isolated marvels. They were integral components of a larger metabolic system, with the sewer as its beating heart. The location where this processed waste finally met a river or the sea then dictated the development of the urban periphery. Downstream areas, often stigmatized, became industrial zones for tanning and dyeing, while the outfalls themselves influenced the siting of ports and harbors, further channeling the city's economic growth along these engineered pathways. Contrast this with cities that failed to solve this fundamental puzzle. Medieval European towns, after the Roman knowledge was lost, remained small and perpetually unstable. Their growth was physically capped by the stench and sickness that festered in their streets. A population of 50,000 was a teeming, dangerous metropolis in this context, vulnerable to a single contaminated well, wiping out a quarter of its inhabitants in a matter of weeks. These were not truly sustainable cities. They were dense gatherings of people living under a constant, biological sword of Damocles. The ability to manage waste was therefore a primary determinant of a city's fate. It was the difference between a permanent center of power, culture, and commerce, and a temporary, precarious settlement destined to be thinned by plague or abandoned when the filth became unbearable. The skyline of spires and towers was only made possible by the tunnels dug deep below. The silent, creeping horror of a medieval city was not the plague itself, but the conditions that welcomed it. For most of human history, a city was a fragile experiment, a dense gathering of people living under a constant biological threat. In this world, a sewer was far more than a convenience. It was a civilization's primary defense against its own waste. The evidence locked in those sunken channels gives us our most direct measure of that daily struggle, a catalogue of suffering written in parasite eggs and bacterial DNA. We can quantify the whipworms that plagued the Roman poor and the roundworms that infested medieval populations, translating these microscopic shells into a clear picture of chronic pain and malnutrition. This is the baseline misery of the ancient world, but then sometimes the record captures a true catastrophe. The DNA of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes plague, has been identified in the dental plaque of skeletons from the 6th and 14th centuries. This genetic evidence tells us the killer was present, but it is the sewer, or rather the absence of one, that explains its fury. The open gutters and contaminated wells of a medieval town created the perfect ecosystem for the rats and fleas that carried the disease, allowing a single infection to become a city-wide firestorm. The contrast with Rome at its height is staggering. The Roman investment in aqueducts and the Cloaca Maxima did not eliminate disease, but it created a buffer. By systematically removing waste and providing fresh water, they broke the most direct routes of transmission for waterborne killers like cholera and typhoid. This infrastructure was the unsung hero behind the empire's population growth and military dominance, a bulwark that granted centuries of relative stability. That stability shattered when the knowledge and will to maintain these systems faded. The medieval world inherited the ruins of Roman engineering, but lost the societal commitment to public health, and the consequences were written in the catastrophic death tolls of the Black Death. These are not just stories from the past, they are stark case studies in cause and effect. They demonstrate a fundamental, non-negotiable truth that the health of a population is inextricably linked to the quality of its public infrastructure. Investing in clean water and safe waste removal is not a luxury. It is the most basic investment a society can make in its own people, in its economic strength, and in its very resilience against the inevitable crises of the future. The same sewer sludge that reveals a civilization's dinner menu can also recount the story of its weather. Deep within these sunken archives, preserved alongside broken pottery and lost coins, lies a meticulous record of the ancient world's climate. A single layer of sediment is a time capsule not just of human habits, but of the entire living environment that surrounded the city. Scientists sifting through this muck are not only urban archaeologists, they are becoming paleoecologists, reading the whispers of forgotten ecosystems from the most unlikely of places. Consider the humble pollen grain. These microscopic, incredibly durable shells from flowers, trees, and grasses wash into the sewers with the rain and wind. When identified and counted, they paint a vivid picture of the landscape beyond the city walls. A sudden surge in olive pollen, for instance, signals a period of extensive orchard cultivation, perhaps driven by economic demand or a favorable climate. A later layer dominated by the pollen of hardy weeds and drought-resistant plants, however, might tell a very different story, one of failing crops, abandoned fields, and a prolonged dry spell that pushed the local agriculture to its limits. The sewer becomes a barometer for regional abundance and famine, its layers marking the good years and the desperate ones. The remains of insects offer another precise set of clues. The hard wing cases of beetles and the delicate skeletons of flies are often preserved in these anaerobic conditions. Different species thrive under very specific environmental conditions. Finding a type of beetle that only lives in clean, well-oxygenated freshwater suggests the city's aqueducts were flowing strong and the local rivers were healthy. Conversely, a proliferation of fly species that breed in stagnant, organic waste points to standing water and poor sanitation within the city itself, a direct reflection of urban management during a wetter or drier period. These tiny carcasses are nature's own data loggers, recording the daily temperature and humidity of a world long gone. Even the fish bones and shellfish shells discarded from ancient kitchens hold climate secrets. A shift over time from open water species to those that prefer silted, slow-moving rivers could indicate that a nearby estuary was filling with sediment, perhaps due to deforestation upstream. A decline in the overall size of the fish, or the complete disappearance of a once common species, might point to overfishing driven by a growing population, or it could signal a change in water temperature or salinity that made the river less hospitable. Each fish vertebra is a tiny receipt from a specific aquatic environment, and when those receipts change, it signals a shift in the larger ecosystem. The most personal climate record is written in the human waste itself. Through isotopic analysis, scientists can measure the ratios of different forms of carbon and nitrogen preserved in ancient fecal matter. These ratios can reveal what people were eating. During a period of reliable rainfall and strong harvests, the isotopic signature would reflect a diet rich in a variety of cultivated grains. But during a long drought when crops failed, the signature would shift, showing that people were forced to rely on drought-resistant wild plants, or even on bark and forage they would normally avoid. The sewer tells us not just that there was a famine, but how it physically altered the biochemistry of the population. This is how we see ancient civilizations not as isolated entities, but as deeply integrated parts of their environment, constantly adapting to the whims of a changing climate. The story of a city is forever tied to the story of its land, its water, and its air, all faithfully recorded in the one place where everything eventually flows. The secrets still buried in the world's ancient drains are far from exhausted, and the tools for unlocking them are advancing at a breathtaking pace. We are entering an era where the line between archaeology and molecular biology is blurring entirely. Scientists can now extract and sequence ancient DNA from sewer sediments, not just from seeds or bones, but from the very bacteria that lived inside the people themselves. This allows for the reconstruction of entire ancient gut microbiomes, the complex ecosystems of microbes that influenced everything from digestion to immunity. We can compare the gut health of a Roman citizen to that of a medieval farmer, understanding how diet, sanitation, and lifestyle shaped the invisible inhabitants of the human body across millennia. This is not just about disease, it is about the fundamental, microscopic partnership between people and the trillions of organisms that called them home. Alongside this molecular revolution, a new kind of pattern recognition is emerging. Imagine correlating the data from 100 different sewer sites from the coast of Spain to the deserts of Syria. By applying artificial intelligence to this vast accumulation of evidence, researchers can identify continent-wide trends that would be invisible to the human eye. An algorithm might detect that a specific type of millet grain, once confined to Egypt, suddenly appears in European sewers a decade before it shows up in any written trade record. It could map the spread of a parasite, tracing its movement along road systems and sea routes with unprecedented precision. This big data approach transforms individual sewer findings from isolated stories into a single, interconnected narrative of human movement, economic exchange, and epidemiological history on a grand scale. The temporal scope of this field is also expanding dramatically. There is a growing and urgent focus on the archaeology of the very recent past, on the 19th and 20th century sewer systems that lie just beneath our feet. These industrial-era conduits hold the material evidence of our own rapid transformation. Their sediments are time capsules of the chemical revolution, capturing the first traces of synthetic dyes, industrial pollutants, and pharmaceuticals. Studying them reveals the environmental cost of modernization and the public health consequences of unchecked urbanization, offering critical lessons as we grapple with similar challenges today. This work is no longer the sole domain of the archaeologist with a trowel. The most exciting projects now bring together a chorus of different voices. Engineers help model the hydraulics of ancient systems, public health experts interpret disease patterns, and city planners use these ancient blueprints to brainstorm solutions for modern mega-cities facing water scarcity and waste management crises. The ultimate goal is shifting from simply reconstructing what was to actively informing what could be. The pragmatic wisdom of the Indus Valley, the integrated water management of ancient China, these are not just historical curiosities. They are a deep well of proven ideas, a catalogue of human ingenuity that we are only now learning to read. The humble sewer, long ignored, is becoming a guidebook for building a more resilient and sustainable urban future. The popular image of ancient Rome is one of universal public latrines and flowing aqueducts, but this vision is deeply misleading. For the vast majority of Rome's inhabitants, the reality of sanitation was far more precarious. The celebrated public latrines, with their marble seats and social atmosphere, were primarily a feature of the city's monumental center, accessible mainly to the wealthy, merchants, and soldiers. High above these spaces, in the cramped, towering apartment blocks known as insulae, the common people lived a different life entirely. There was no plumbing to their homes. Their only option was the chamber pot, which was either emptied into vats collected by night soil men or, in the worst cases, simply flung into the alleyways below. The Grand Cloaca Maxima was a marvel, but it served a specific, privileged part of the urban landscape, leaving the rest of the city to fend for itself in a daily struggle against filth. We often label the centuries after Rome's fall as universally filthy dark ages, but this overlooks a crucial part of the story. While many European cities did see their sanitation infrastructure crumble, other parts of the world were achieving new heights of engineering. Across the Islamic world, from Baghdad to Cordoba, scholars and engineers preserved and expanded upon classical knowledge. They built sophisticated water systems with advanced filtration, constructed public baths as centers of community life, and developed extensive sewer networks that served entire urban populations. To view this period only through the lens of Europe's decline is to ignore a vibrant chapter in the global history of public health, where the torch of knowledge was not extinguished but carried forward. The dramatic scene of a servant shouting "Gardelu" and tipping a chamber pot from an upper window is a staple of medieval films, but it was hardly the daily norm. While such reckless disposal certainly happened, most urban households had more systematic, if still rudimentary, methods. Waste was a commodity. It was collected in cesspits that were periodically emptied by farmers who valued it as a rich fertilizer for their fields. In many towns, official regulations and guilds managed this collection, turning human waste into a crucial part of the agricultural economy. The image of indiscriminate dumping is an exaggeration that obscures the pragmatic, if unpleasant, recycling systems that were in place. And finally, we must discard the notion that ancient people were completely ignorant of the link between filth and disease. They may not have understood germ theory, but they possessed a powerful empirical understanding. Roman architects like Vitruvius explicitly advised against building houses near swamps because of the dangerous vapors they emitted. Medical texts from India and China detailed the importance of clean water and proper waste disposal for maintaining health. People knew that foul smells and stagnant water brought sickness, even if they explained it through theories of bad air or miasmas. This practical wisdom drove the construction of sewers and aqueducts long before the microscope revealed the true culprits. The past was not a simple time of either brilliant cleanliness or universal squalor. It was a complex tapestry of innovation, inequality, and practical wisdom, a story far more compelling than any myth. The grand narrative of Rome's fall, filled with tales of barbarian hordes and moral decay, begins to crumble when we examine the contents of its sewers. In the very centuries when historians describe an empire collapsing under its own weight, the drains of cities like Ostia and Constantinople tell a more nuanced story. They reveal a continuing flow of imported goods, from African olive oil to Egyptian grain, suggesting complex trade networks that persisted long after the political center had shifted. This is not the garbage of a society in total freefall, but of one adapting, transforming, and maintaining a degree of economic life that written chronicles, focused on court intrigue and military defeats, often miss entirely. The evidence of a diverse diet for many urban dwellers forces us to reconsider what decline actually meant for the millions of people living through it. It challenges the sweeping, dramatic collapse we so often imagine, replacing it with a slower, more complicated story of change. This ground-level data acts as a crucial check against the pessimism of elite authors who saw the end of their world in every political setback. Similarly, the silent, orderly drains of the Indus Valley have completely rewritten our understanding of that civilization. For decades, scholars assumed that any ancient society of that scale must have been ruled by a god-king, a despot who commanded the labor to build cities. Yet after more than a century of excavation, no grand palaces, no colossal royal tombs, and no monumental statues of rulers have been found. The most impressive and universal achievement is the plumbing. This physical evidence strongly supports a radical idea that the Indus Valley might have been a uniquely collective society, one that invested its surplus not in glorifying a single ruler, but in guaranteeing a basic standard of cleanliness and comfort for a vast number of its people. The sewer does not just hint at social structure, it loudly proclaims a possible alternative to the default model of ancient power. Even the slow chill of climate history finds a human heartbeat in these channels. As the Little Ice Age gripped Europe, the pollen grains preserved in medieval sewer silt tell a silent story of failing harvests. The seeds and animal bones from the same layers show a diet becoming less diverse, more reliant on hardier but less nutritious crops. The resulting malnutrition, readable in the skeletal remains and the surge in certain diseases, connects a planetary shift in temperature directly to the dinner plates and aching stomachs of ordinary people. This is not an abstract graph of global cooling. It is the physical record of a family shivering through a longer winter, their meals growing thinner as the summers grew colder. By providing this quantitative, ground-level data, sewer archaeology ensures that the experiences of the majority are no longer a historical silence. It corrects the record, pushing back against histories written solely by and about the powerful. The true story of humanity is not found only in the throne room or on the battlefield, but in the unvarnished, everyday reality of how people lived, what they ate, and how they managed the fundamental challenge of living together. This connection transforms the grand, impersonal sweep of history into something immediate, tangible, and deeply personal. You are standing in the echoing darkness of the Cloaca Maxima. The air is thick, a humid mix of stone dust and something organic and sour. A river of dark water, wider than you are tall, flows steadily past your feet, carrying with it the collective evidence of 1,000,000 lives from the city above. Through a grate in the ceiling, narrow shafts of Mediterranean sunlight cut through the gloom, illuminating dancing motes of dust and the faint, shimmering slick on the water's surface. You can hear the muffled rumble of cartwheels and the distant murmur of a crowd in the forum, a world away just a few feet above your head. This is not a ruin, it is a living system, the beating heart of Rome's metabolism. The sound of the water is constant, a low rush that speaks of immense engineered power. You reach out and touch the wall, your fingers tracing the cool, precise seams of the massive stone blocks, each one perfectly fitted to its neighbor to withstand the pressure and the flow for centuries. The smell is not what you might expect, not a simple foulness, but a complex odor of damp earth, of stone, of minerals from the aqueduct water, and beneath it all, the undeniable, pungent truth of human existence. This is the reality that our data points can only hint at. A single pottery shard bobs in the current, a broken comb swirls in an eddy, each one a tiny piece of a story we are only now learning to read. To stand here is to understand that history is not a clean, dry text. It is a wet, messy, and deeply sensory experience. This virtual journey does more than show us the engineering. It forces us to confront the scale and the humanity of it all. The parasites we find in the lab were here, floating in this very water. The exotic fruit seeds from a merchant's discarded meal were swept along this channel. This immersive perspective bridges the vast gap between the abstract list of artifacts and the lived, visceral truth of the ancient world. It transforms our understanding from an intellectual exercise into an empathetic one, allowing us to walk for a few moments in the shadowy world that made the sunlit city above possible. Emerging from these depths, we carry back a new vision of history itself. The chronicles of emperors and the dates of great battles now feel like only half the story, the public performance of a civilization. The other half, the more honest half, was written in the things they threw away. We have sat at the invisible table of a Roman family, learning their tastes from a fishbone and a peppercorn. We have walked the clean, orderly streets of the Indus Valley, not by seeing their monuments, but by tracing the bricks of their drains. These subterranean channels have given us a startlingly democratic vision of the past, one that includes the slave who maintained the sewer, the child who lost a shoe, and the merchant who discarded a broken scale. This is the story of ingenuity, not in soaring architecture, but in the simple, profound act of managing water and waste. It is the story of struggle, written in the enduring shells of parasites that plagued the masses. And it is the story of daily reality, in the worn texture of a cooking pot and the charred remains of a simple meal. Let this journey be a lasting reminder that the true pulse of a civilization is found not only in its extraordinary achievements, but in the ordinary, the mundane, and the utterly essential rhythms of existence. So the next time you walk down a city street, pause for a moment, look at the manhole covers beneath your feet, and consider the river of evidence flowing just out of sight. What story will our own sewers tell? What will future archaeologists learn from the chemical traces of our medicines, the microplastics from our clothes, and the digital detritus of our lives? The choices we make today about our water, our waste, and our shared environment are the history books we are writing for tomorrow. If this descent into the past has changed how you see the world above, consider joining us for more journeys into history's hidden layers. Let us know in the comments what surprised you most. Was it the global economy in a Roman drain, or the quiet equality of the Indus Valley? The past is never truly gone. It is simply waiting, patient and full of truth, in the ground below.